I guess it did. It happened real early, but I don't. Obsession, I guess, implies that I was consciously aware. So I guess you couldn't say 4 years old. I will say that from a very early age, I knew what I was going to do, which is different from a lot of people, if not most people. My stepfather used to tell me, of course I was like 37 years old, something like that, when he became my stepfather, so this was not mentor-like language. Anyway, he said, "You're very lucky. You always knew what you wanted to do." And until that late date in life, it had never occurred to me what a firm fix that is, as opposed to many people, I guess. Anyway, to get back to your question, which is not that complicated, I started doing little dances and things when I was 4. But I guess the year is fixed by an event that can be actually stuck to a calendar. There was a point young in life when I was listening to R&B groups, and I decided, that was my that was what I idolized. This is pre-Elvis Presley, and I had decided I was going to name my group. Actually, I already had a group here. I was going to be Johnny Corvette and the Corvettes. Now the boomers, everyone has begun to realize, are fascinated with Corvettes, and they always show those same old vintage Vettes. Well, the first year the Vette was 53. That's when this happened. I was 8 years old. I mean, now I'm piecing this all back. The Vette was like a spaceship. It was like that guitar that Buddy Holly had, the Strat. He's like, wow, that's so future. Wow. So, I mean, why not change my name? My name was dumb, but Corvette, Johnny Corvette and the Corvettes. That's history. I think at that moment is when it was an obsession. We had an old Stella guitar around the house for ages. For those of you who, I don't think they make them anymore, but for those of you who haven't seen a Stella, mine was better than most. The strings were only about a ½ an inch off the neck. It was like a Hawaiian, steel guitar. It was amazing. On that guitar, I first learned Endless Sleep, Jody Reynolds. I mean, that was the first time that hey, I can do this, banging away on 2 chords. But the piano, I guess I could pick out individual notes. I think it'd be simpler to say both of them in their kind of rudimentary fashion was at the same time. I never really I'm not a world beater on any of those instruments. I'm just not. My guitar playing is not Eddie Van Halen or Joe Satriani or anybody like that. But I think it's because I was always fascinated with the end result, meaning records. I mean, my mother came home one day when I was about 12. I had just learned how to play the guitar. Learned how to play. It's a lifelong thing, but I could play some notes. We had a hi-hat we had borrowed from someone. That's a drum, part of the drum set. And Doug would get to use that when he showed up at my house. I mean, we none of us had our own equipment except the piano in the living room. My mother walked in, and there I was with one hand playing the hi-hat and the other hand playing the piano. She just looked at me and with this face that said, "What in the world are you doing?" And it's 2 instruments, 2 hands, playing both at the same time. And along, of course, I was singing too. I didn't find that unusual. You can't hear the left hand of the piano on a record. It's just this stuff down there. But you do hear the crash of the cymbals. So I was crashing away with the cymbals with my left hand and playing the right hand on the piano. Made perfect sense to me. And all over the musical spectrum, too. Of course, rock and roll always, I guess you'd have to say, that's what turned my head. That's what firmly fixed me into an identity. But since I actually started before they had a word rock and roll, I guess, it was going to happen anyway. I remember Bill Haley really turning my head. I remember Grand Ole Opry on TV. And also a show we had in the Bay Area called the Hoffman Hayride, which was kind of a a local version of the Hoffman or of the Grand Ole Opry. It was country music from the Bay Area, believe it or not, 1951 or two. Hoffman, by the way, was a television brand name. Right, as far as country, it's kind of like to country what Johnny Otis was doing with R&B. During this same period when my mother caught me with one hand on each instrument, I had taken the old Jack Fina record, which was called Bumble Boogie, which is Flight of the Bumblebee. And I wanted to know how to play it, but I didn't read music, and that seemed like the long way around. We had a 78. Well, I slowed it down to 33, and you heard this boom, 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 boom. I'm doing the bass notes, and I figured out what they were. Then I'd put the record back on speed so I'd know the right key I should be doing this in. Then I'd go back. See, digitally now you can just tell the machine, play slower. But in those days, you lost pitch as well. Anyway, I figured it out, and I made my way pretty well through the whole 3.5 minutes. If you've ever heard this record, it's a blistering thing. And that was one of the first pieces I ever learned. Now I was going to say it's an accident, but maybe it was preordained. Here I was sucking up all this stuff starting about 1950. The earliest record I can remember is Red River Valley, as telling people, that's my favorite song, Tex Ritter, right? Of course, that changed by week probably, but that's the first one. It's still maybe my very favorite song. It's just Americana, right? And from that time on, through Elvis, Otis Redding, I'm jumping all over the place, Stax Records, Memphis, Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters. Unconsciously, there was this Southern fix, but I had never identified it. I never sat down and intellectually discussed it. It was just there. If you said rock and roll, you were also saying South, but I didn't know that. So when it came time for me to get real serious as a very early adult, 22, maybe 21, I got out of the Army in 67, or at least my active duty portion, and I began to write. I won't say prolific, well, it was prolifically, but I'd say more the word would be with much earnest. I was staying up all night and, just pushing and pushing and pushing to write. And this mythical place, rock and roll musical place came out. The Bayou, etc. But it didn't come all at once, like bang, there it was. It just several songs that I began to write. Now that I was freeing my mind, what I was doing was, don't try and be Otis Redding. Don't do what the Gollywogs did. Do, flavor of the month. For a while we were the Beatles, then we were Dave Clark 5, then we were whatever. Because we were told kind of, be the radio. We had these silly little white wigs we wore, and we were mods, and we were rockers, and we were Carnaby Street, all that. And I had finally grown up. And when I sat down to kind of write, which was much more mental, I really usually didn't even have a guitar. I just was kind of envisioning. The Bayou thing came out, but I still didn't know. People would talk to me about it. And I really didn't make the connection until I went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame the first year that they had. I think that was 86, if I'm not mistaken. Of the first 10 inductees, 10 were from the South. I made a point to count this out. I realized everybody else, Elvis and all that. And the only guy I wasn't sure about was Sam Cooke, because he kind of seemed uptown. But he's originally from somewhere in the South. And I think by way of L.A. maybe. And there it was. I said, wait a minute, 10 out of 10, and these were the early pioneers. I said, it isn't just me, it's rock and roll. Maybe that was really the beginning of what eventually became unique, this mythical area, the southern swamp, whatever. Because we had called ourselves, the Blue Velvets. That's kind of like the Corvettes, Later, we were the Gollywogs. That was handed to us, or more than that even, right? But still, it's kind of that lame adolescent searching for something. We really didn't know. But when I kind of pieced together the full name, Creedence Clearwater Revival, I knew the instant it popped into my head that it was unique, and it had a flavor on it that was exactly what I was trying to project. The name was better than the group, is what I've always said about that time. The actual occurrence, since it's been maybe 15 years since I told the story, I might as well tell it. It was a Christmas Eve, so you know the kind of good feeling family mood you have at that time. I was watching TV, and an ad came on with the Beach Boys, or at least sound alike, and I think it was actually them, doing an Olympia or beer commercial. And it was all this, it was in color, lush green, the area, it was almost a swamp. It was just, you know, the typical Northwest Oregon, Washington kind of look, this river, beautiful, pristine forest, all that. And they're singing, you know, don't worry, baby, whatever they were singing. And right after it was an ad for an anti-pollution ad about cleaning the water up. And it was the ad that was before the Ironized Cody ad with the tear. It was the one just before that. It showed all these styrofoam cups in the water. It's black and white, very harsh, as all video makers know now. They use black and white when they're trying to really look earthy and hip and arty. Well, anyway, and the thing was if you want to do something about cleaning up these rivers, then write to Clearwater, Washington. Not clean water. I think it was Clearwater. Maybe my mind made the skip. I don't know. But I looked at it and I went, Clearwater, Clearwater, Clearwater. We had, prior to this, been playing around with the word Creedence, along with thousands of others. I remember somebody in the group wanted to call us Hardwood. That was going to be our, you remember all the, you know, Iron Poughkeepsie, you know, not just Iron Butterfly. There were all these other groups. I mean, you know, Hardwood went right in there. So I was trying to get into that kind of hip mode of the late 60s and yet put a flavor on it. I didn't want to be Jefferson Airplane because that wasn't, I didn't consider my musical area psychedelia. And somehow Creedence Clearwater popped in my head. I just, wow, this idea of the clean water, you know, right to the heart of America. I mean, without verbalizing, because I was much too young to be able to talk that way. But the emotion was there, and I was trying to put a tag on the emotion. Remember, this was also Christmas Eve, and revival, because we were kind of, we were coming together again, our four guys in the band. We'd been through thick and thin for 12 years or something. And it was a long name, but you know what? Jefferson Airplane, da-da-da-da-da-da, Cleveland Record Company, all these band names that were coming out of San Francisco. It seemed to be along those lines, and yet it had this sort of Southern American flavor. In fact, I remember telling the guys, well, when we have a record out and it's number 142 on the Billboard chart, I literally said some huge number, and because I didn't expect top 10, I was, you know, some record like The Gollywog's Brown Eyed Girl, but it would get listed 142, and you'd look, it's Creedence Clearwater Revival, you'll think it's something real, like from a Southern church or something, see? And I like that. I like that imagery or that feeling. So that's kind of why it stuck. We took some flack for that from the hipper, quote, hipper side. And it was never really voiced. It was more like you just sort of knew this thing was there, as if we were Donnie and Marie Osmond somehow, you know. And I used to kind of laugh and I go, well, these, quote, the quote, hipper people, and I don't mean to say the Airplane per se, it was more like maybe fans of theirs who misguidedly used that as their banner. I'd always say to myself, well, gee, if you want to be a starving artist, then don't make a record. If you're going to make a record, you probably want someone to hear it. It's, you know, as long as you're true to yourself and you're not just glomming onto any current fashion to sell records. To me, the real trip was to kind of walk that fine line in between. In those days, it was like, well, are we an album band or a singles band? You know, why do I have to decide? Or can I come back to that question later? That one, there's a lot. It's funny. A lot of times, history doesn't work out the right way. Like a couple years ago, when they had the All-Star game in the Oakland Coliseum, and Reggie Jackson was playing for the A's, and doggone it, something should have happened here. You know, some kind of little, but it's Reggie's last year, and everybody dropped the ball, and I sat there, and I went, doggone it. So you could have, thank you, Reggie, for 20 great years or something. Anyway, most of the time, history's like that. Things don't work out in this sort of monumental fashion. But Proud Mary seems to have been aimed to where it was going to go. It's kind of funny. In the weeks before I wrote the song, I had gotten myself a little notebook because, as I said, I was writing in earnest, and I realized I was losing ideas. I'd have an idea and I'd lose it. Wow, and I was so angry about that. So I decided to get a book and try and write things in it. Just a small little kid's notebook. We're talking 4 inches by 2 inches, something like that. Maybe it's 5 by 3. Those are the cards that go in there. Anyway, the very first thing I wrote in the book, Proud Mary, in the top line of the first page. And I had originally envisioned, well, what is Proud Mary? And I thought, well, maybe that'll be about kind of a domestic, a maid, in other words, getting off the bus, and she's got to wear that white uniform, and she comes to these rich people's house, and somehow she affects their lives. Kind of the story that was in Clara's Heart, maybe, that she's keeping all these people together, because they're too dumb and neurotic to take care of themselves. But somewhere in there, it drifted, and I got the chorus rolling on, and when that happened, I got this little chill. I thought, wow, that's above what old John has done before. That's like a classic there. I mean, I knew it for what it was as a song. As we began to rehearse it with the band, as I finished the song, we all started calling it our Tin Pan Alley song. I mean, we all kind of knew it was like, you could see the guys in the plaid coats sitting with a cigar, sitting around a piano, trying to knock one out for the big show on Broadway. And I think everything sort of that's the hub, and everything kind of revolved around that. And it went on to become, what it did. Played at presidential inaugurations and weddings, all that stuff that the Gollywogs always did before. I mean, it's so funny, except on a larger scale. Connection with that? This was before I went on my active duty. And I was like leaving the world, as it were, as we all felt. And we were playing one of the Gollywogs' last little concerts or shows, and Quicksilver was there. And those were the hot days of SF bands. And they started doing this song. It really had a neat melody. I mean, I really loved it. And then I heard him saying, Lodi, Lodi. And I went, oh no, because I'd always intended to write a Lodi song someday, right? And I went running up to one of the guys. I said, what's that song? Well, it's so telling about the times. That's Lodi, right? She said, no, Codine. Oh, of course. I don't know. It's funny because in the beginning I sure wasn't any good. I mean, it just seemed to... Maybe it started because originally we were an instrumental band. And the 3 guys that were the Blue Velvets for 10 years, we were Ventures, Dwayne Eddy, and all that stuff. And I found it very handy when we needed a certain kind of song. I would write an instrumental to fit our instrumentation. We didn't have a saxophone. We didn't have the little organ for Red River Rock or that kind of thing. So I'd try and write something else that would use our instrumentation. But then again, looking back, very early on in the old Bo Diddley days, 55, I was 10 years old, I was fooling around with imagery and the word. I mean, as came out in my trial a few months ago, the imagery went in pretty strong as a 10-year-old. And I then tucked it away for a long time because at 10, it's pretty hard to sound like the mean, bad voodoo man. But the imagery was there. Bo Diddley and Howlin' Wolf, those guys scared me to death. It just popped out later. And I guess... well, maybe a dumb answer would be my dad was a writer, prose, fiction, nonfiction, and somehow in my genes it came through that way because he was really good, and it seemed to me my interest in words and all that sort of thing was really pretty strong as a kid. Well, Bill Graham, who I just saw 3 days ago, I still count as one of my very dear friends. He's a. I turned to my daughter. My family went to the Bammies, and Bill had walked by, and we started talking and stuff. When I sat down, I turned to my daughter and I said, "I think if a person could be described with one word, with him, you'd use the word gentleman." And I've always been very strong to say that because I run across certain people sometimes that I guess for one reason or another had some kind of run-in with Bill. And I've always had to consider the source. Bill, he is a gentleman, and he's putting on a show for an audience. And that audience is the utmost, most important thing to him. And he will not countenance guys in bands who want to act like superstars and not deliver to the audience. And he gets after him. He says, you can't get away with that. You got to perform. This is the time you're going to be there, and you're going to go on now, that sort of thing. That's right. And that's what I loved him for. I used to love our meetings, as a matter of fact, back in the days when, I'd go in and try and ask for a raise, that sort of thing. But we always knew there was no funny business. We always knew what to expect. That's probably going to come up a lot this year because it's 20 years and all that sort of. I've been waiting for the Woodstock burgers and the T-shirts and not to demean it or anything. I have a feeling they're going to focus on all this stuff this year, and I don't think I want to be the spokesman for the Woodstock generation. I'll just simply say that we did many. Rock. That was the year of the rock festival that summer, and we did a lot of them. And it turned out. I was happy that it turned out nice, and that it was peaceful, and that it ended all right. I think the biggest thing on my mind at the time, other than us playing and doing a good set, I had this feeling that with so many people here, all in this sort of confined space, that the potential for something to go wrong was right there, and I was very aware and concerned about that. You probably want to ask me about Duke Tomatoe. Yeah. It's great when things come to you and aren't hyped and aren't built up and pumped up so that you're exposed totally free without someone going, hey, Johnny, you got to see this. It's great. You'll love it. Yeah, it's very much, I was in the frame of mind where I was trying to expose myself to pure American, let's say, music that got, I hate to use the word roots, but at least something I could, it vibrated that inner harmonic in me, and a lot of people liked me. And it was in that frame of mind that I first saw Duke. Not really expecting, we were mostly had kind of gathered where he was playing, just a bunch of friends, to have a good time, and that was going to be the background, kind of. Well, I've always thought it would be an awful lot of work, and I've turned down probably dozens, if not hundreds, of offers, a gleam in some manager's eye somewhere, but not necessarily something I wanted to do. I just have always just said, you don't really want to walk into that, John. You're having a hard enough time, taking care of yourself. Careers tend to, as mine has, they get hot, and then for some reason you get in these cycles where you just can't seem to get the shoelaces tied, the things to get together and be done, be produced or be finished. And I've always rejected this, but sitting there watching Duke for the first time, I was amazed. What is this? It's great music, but there's another element here. And coming back to see him, I watched him maybe 4 times in a very short period of time. There was this audience participation. I couldn't believe it. I said, this guy has these people eating out of his hand, and they all know what's going on here. It's like they're doing things I don't know about. Some of the songs were unfamiliar to me, but they all knew them, and they were right there with Duke, right? Finally, the idea began, geez, this guy deserves to be heard. It was kind of in a sense of fairness, and then I said, well, gee, someone ought to produce him, and I'm some other mystical character. And finally, I realize that that other person I've been alluding to is me. It's up to me to do something. The next year and a half, it turned into every bit as much work as I'd always thought it would be. Also, convincing a major corporation to get behind this guy from a bar in the middle of Indiana. But happily they did. I mean, they went on, I guess, my passion for the thing and believing my instincts, I guess. I've since had enough guts to ask the question of well, is this what you expected, what you thought I was telling you about a year ago? And everybody said, yeah. So I kind of am off the hook now. Well, I'm working on the writing right now. And while all of us are always between parts or working on the next album, it gets kind of ongoing and repetitive. But I'd say starting since my trial of '88, the Trials of Fogerty is going to be a book, be one of those airport type books. Anyway, I've begun to write finally, and I'm very happy with that. It's gotten more and more refined to where I'd say since the first of this year, '89, I'm starting to have a little pocket full of keepers, is what I call them. So I would think this year sometime.